We're really pleased to be here tonight with you to talk a bit about where do we go from here? What should progressives do, given the moment that we're in, given the very disappointing results of the election? I think a lot of us are disappointed with the way the Democratic Party handled this election, handled Donald Trump, and now we're in this very precarious moment where we have an incoming president who is a fascist, who's going to bring a lot of people who are opposed to the federal government, opposed to the regulatory state into Washington. And the so-called opposition is a party who I think a lot of us have lost faith in. And as progressives, as people who are on the left, we have a duty to not retreat from this moment, but instead to stand up and try to be the agents of change we want to see, despite the incredibly adverse circumstances that we find ourselves in. So, this is the beginning of what we hope is at least a two-part series of conversations about this. We hope to have another one next month that we would like for you all to join us for. But for this first conversation, we wanted to just start by talking a bit about what do we see the current moment as being, where are we right now? What are some of the obstacles that we have to overcome? And what do we think about what just happened? What's our analysis of the election and what went wrong? What did progressives have right? What do progressives need to think about more as we continue to promulgate a more left vision for this country? So we have with us a panel of folks from RootsAction and from Progressive Democrats of America, who are going to talk a little bit about their take on the election, the moment we're in, and then we'd love to hear from all of you. So this can be a fairly informal conversation. If you can please hold commentary and comments until after we hear from our four panelists, and then we'll go ahead and open the floor, and I will take stack. So without any further ado, I want to first pass the mic over to India Walton, who's a senior strategist with us at RootsAction.
Thanks, Sam. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this very important conversation, right? So I think a part of what we're going to talk about this evening is the postmortem to the postmortem. Even though we're disappointed with the results, I don't think that many people in this room are surprised. In fact, RootsAction, long before Joe Biden decided to step aside and not run again, we ran a campaign asking for the Democrats to have an open primary process, basically saying that we didn't think that he was the person to beat Donald Trump. So I think that a lot of the problem was not only that Joe Biden just stepped aside too late from the nomination, but that the Democrats did not have a message that was resonant with people like me. So when I think about elections and voters, I think about people who are like me, people I know, people I run into in the grocery store or the coffee shop. I am a working class Black grandma, right? And I want to make sure that we are thinking about the environment and climate change and infrastructure and healthcare and education and jobs. And I don't think that the message and campaigning with Liz Cheney and saying that the continuation of supporting Democrats was going to be a Biden administration 2.0, it wasn't enough to get people out to the polls. So right now, I think where we are, and when I say the postmortem to the postmortem, rather than the Democratic establishment taking responsibility for the failures, for their failure to really grab and turn out the base and motivate young voters and speak to working class Americans, rather than taking responsibility for the opulence of the DNC and for the avoidance of small d democracy and having an open primary, they're blaming us. They're saying, well, we lost the election to Trump because the progressives are trying to push us too far left. And I think that the problem is that we're not going far enough. I think that in this moment, looking toward the incoming administration, some of the cabinet choices that he is choosing, and a lot of what I am feeling on the ground, especially here in Buffalo, being a border city, is that people are very afraid. And I think that we need to turn our organizing inward and hyper local. I think that for the next 4 years, we have to be hyper focused on mutual aid, taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other, because no matter who is in the White House, we have to survive the next 4 years to be able to fight. And that means that we have to be taking care of one another first and organizing at the local level to make sure that we're able to take care of each other, to make sure that with the erosion of civil rights and education, that we are making sure that we have control at the school board level to make sure that our children are being properly educated, and that history is not being rewritten. We have to make sure that people on county boards and commissions and city councils are carrying progressive values that are putting people first. That's what I got, and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation and hearing what other folks think. And I guess I can just pass it over to Hanya to talk more about sort of where you see we went. Well, not us. We didn't go wrong. Where they went wrong. I'm not taking any responsibility for this at all. We did our part. We did more than enough. And even after we were slapped in the face and said that this is your candidate, we were still sending buses into battleground states. We were still knocking doors. We were still making phone calls. And like I said before, the progressives and the leftists, we are the ones who organize, who get out and do the work, and we are always the ones who are denied the basic decency of just having a solid policy platform that benefits the people who we work so hard to care for each and every day. So passing it on to you, Hanya.
Thanks so much, India. And I'll just cut in really quickly and introduce Hanya. Hanya is a strategist with Diffuse Nuclear War, and she's also the director of partnerships with us at RootsAction. Take it away, Hanya.
Thank you so much to you, Sam, India, Norman Solomon, Alan Minsky, and all of you agents of change who chose to be here. You could be anywhere this afternoon, but you chose to be here to talk about exactly what is needed to change and shift policy here in this country. And I think, I can't really, it's hard for me to speak after India because she always really eloquently covers everything. But I think the 2024 election results exposed deep cracks within the Democratic Party, and these cracks that very many respected progressives have long warned about. This loss really wasn't inevitable. It stemmed truly from a failure to address the urgent concerns of the communities across the country, particularly marginalized groups. And I'll talk a little bit about the Muslim community. And I think in order for us to be able to move forward, we have to talk about the past openly. And sometimes I wish that during these calls, we had some of the neoliberal folks who, the vote blue no matter who folks showed up, because I feel like I will be preaching to the choir, but at the same time, these are the folks who actually do need to hear what the problem is and how to help us solve the issues. And I think time and time again, progressives caution the party against its over-resilience on symbolic gestures instead of delivering meaningful action. And communities don't necessarily vote for platitudes. They vote for policies that improve their lives. Yet the Democratic Party continues to fall short and fell short on critical issues like Medicare for all, student debt relief, transformative climate action, and inflation. Millions felt abandoned, and a striking example of misplaced priorities lies in the numbers. I'll read the stat for you, which is from the Institute for Middle East Understanding Policy, that says U.S. taxpayers spent $22.76 billion last year on Israel's military operations, compared to just $4.5 billion allocated to federal homeless assistance programs. Meanwhile, the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, had its budget slashed by $1 billion, receiving just over $9.2 billion. So these disparities fueled frustration, left voters questioning why they're perpetually forced to choose the lesser of two evils. And when I speak for my community, I say the Muslim community, for us, the tipping point was foreign policy. The Biden administration's critical support for Israel during a genocide alienated not only Muslims, but anyone who has a pulse, who values human rights. And each US veto of a ceasefire resolution at the United Nations deepened the outrage. Prime Minister Netanyahu's wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes against Palestinians was embraced as an ally. Standing ovation from congressional members when he came to speak before the House. And so, meanwhile, students and protesters who demanded justice for Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank were silenced, sometimes literally handcuffed, on university campuses across the country. So, and as you know, like India mentioned just earlier, rather than addressing these concerns or engaging with us progressives and young voters, including the Muslims, the Latin community, the Black community, VP Harris and her team made a baffling, shocking decision to campaign alongside Liz Cheney, who, while being a critic of Trump, remains the daughter of Dick Cheney, who's the architect of the Iraq War, a war that devastated countless Muslim lives. And this choice sent a very clear message. Rather than speaking to the heart of America, the working class Americans, those who are neglected, the Democratic Party chose to court disillusioned Republicans and present itself really as a softer alternative to the GOP. So, the strategy of triangulation, really trying to win over moderates while sidelining the party's base and Republicans, right? Trying to cater to them, has been criticized by progressives, and unsurprisingly, it backfired. And the refusal to embrace really popular progressive policies created a vacuum. And disillusioned voters, particularly young voters, stayed home or turned to third-party candidates who offered authenticity and moral clarity on policy. And we also have to mention that we witnessed the influence of foreign lobby groups like AIPAC and DMFI in the US elections more than ever this cycle. And I think these groups spent historic amounts to unseat, I don't think, it is the truth. The groups spent historic numbers to unseat progressive champions like Representative Jamal Bowman and Representative Cori Bush by pitting two Democrats against each other. And these two had been supporters of the Palestinian community and against the war that's happening in Gaza, and called for a ceasefire time and time again. And so these actions really further isolated progressives and disillusioned the party's most passionate base, who quite frankly organized for Biden in 2020 when Bernie Sanders suspended his presidential campaign. So for us, it was easy choosing to abstain or vote for a third party. As a Muslim community, for us, it wasn't just a protest, it was really a principled stance. So and we just demanded for a leadership that prioritized justice over expediency, right? And actions over empty rhetoric. So, I always say, and I think I took this from you, India, when we were at the DNC. You were talking to a reporter, I remember, and you said, the Democrats continue to scare us from a 2025 Trump agenda, but we don't even have, as Democrats, a democratic agenda to go by. Where was our 2025 agenda as the Democrats? So I think now, with Trump, as a result of, what we just talked about, Trump is set to govern for the next 4 years, and he's without a doubt will appoint loyalists and ideologues with very little regard to diplomacy and expertise, who could potentially further instability in the Middle East and beyond, including a potential war with Iran. And with Biden just approving long-range missiles to hit Russia, who knows what will happen when the Trump is in office, whether or not that'll turn into a World War III. But, I'll conclude by saying this, and I think my colleague mentioned so eloquently before me, is that if the Democratic Party wishes to build trust, it has to stop taking us for granted as voters. We are smart and we've organized. And so we're going to continue to demand for change. And what we need to do is we need to start changing and shifting from local politics before we can hit national, right? And for us progressives, with so much at stake right now, I think our mission needs to be, how do we take care of ourselves, just like India mentioned, and then how do we get back up and protect and give to organizations that are at the forefront, whether it's RootsAction, whether it's PDA, Progressive Democrats of America, whether it's Code Pink. These are organizations that have been talking about justice for such a long time. So it's our responsibility to continue donating, giving, supporting these organizations so they can continue doing the work that they do. And for us as progressives, failure is not an option. It never has been. So we're going to continue to organize together. And I really do trust that, by relying on each other with love, we can change, whether that's in 4 years, 8 years, but just continue organizing. Sam, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you so much, Hanya, and really important comments about what went awry in this election. Next, I'd like to, if he's with us at the moment, pass it over to Alan Minsky. Alan is the Executive Director of Progressive Democrats for America. Alan, are you there? Yes, there you are.
I am indeed, yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Alan.
Oh, sure, Sam. And let me ask you a question quick. We got 27 people here. Do you think any of the 27 people are moles from one of them might be a mole from the moderate wing of the Democratic Party? Because if I'll change my message if you think any of them are. But
I think you have to, like a police officer, tell us if you're asked if you're a mole. So,
look, yeah, I don't want to get too much into strategy. So this is all not for anybody outside this meeting, but I trust from the RootsAction list and the PDAers who are here, and anybody else who's here, that we're all honest progressives and radicals who want the best for our society. People. I did an interview very early this morning with a literary magazine, and when it was over, I actually, a lot of the questions were they weren't very sophisticated, even though it's a great journal that was interviewing me, their podcast for the journal. Basically along the lines of, tell us how horrible it is and how are we going to survive this, And at the end, it was over, we were talking. I said, in all honesty, yes, I'm very attentive to the cabinet appointments, and they're a horror show. And I do think that Trump 2.0 is going to be significantly more of a threat to the fabric of our society than Trump 1.0 was before January 6th. I think with January 6th having happened and the team that's compiled they're seriously dangerous. But nonetheless, I told these two people I was doing the interview with that I spend most of my time thinking about a different opponent. And the opponent I spend my time thinking about is the moderate wing, the neoliberal, centrist, dominant faction of the Democratic Party. I think that they basically champion. I mean, look, it's true that Joe Biden in his first 2 years, when the Democrats had both houses of Congress, in part because Sanders was very forceful when the way the primary season was settled in 2020, there were these groups that met. He had a very progressive Democratic Party platform, and some of it was followed through. I think we can overstate the degree to which the mainstream of the Democratic Party actually shifted ideologically. The fiscal spending in those packages was significant, and it's very helpful. And it would be promising, but remember, it took place in the context of the COVID crisis. Take those politicians outside of the COVID crisis. And I think there's a real constitutive difference between progressives on domestic economic policy and global economic policy and U.S. foreign policy and environmental policy and addressing structural racism in American society. And it's, always omnipresence. So people, a lot was made that this was the most progressive administration. Well, it was an incredible crisis they were operating in terms of the shutting down of the economy and the supply chain crises and how they had to address it. And they addressed it through, a bunch of fiscal spending that I think they otherwise wouldn't have turned to. So, and then they basically stopped pursuing it after the first 2 years. And that the neoliberal ideology, the Democratic Party's acquiescence to Reaganomics from 1992 until at least 2008, when really the neoliberal economic system absolutely imploded. I mean, its internal dynamics destroyed itself, a familiar mechanism within unregulated capitalism. And the public knows, they put Humpty Dumpty back together again, the people in the Obama administration, Bush administration, the US Fed, the whole arrangement of the globalized economic system, they sort of put it back together again. But since that time, I think the public has just realized, and they've never lost sight of, that this economic system does not work for the majority of the population. It only works for the investor class, who do no real work, right? They just take money they already have and hand it over to people who, oversee it, and they get richer and richer and richer for basically making no direct labor contribution to society. And the rest of us are on a gerbil or a hamster wheel or gerbil wheel, trying to just tread water and keep alive. And it's a lot of precarity, a lot of struggle, huge economic elements of the average life in America don't add up for people. There's one political formation that's active and prominent in American society that actually proposes solutions to these issues. If you look at the polling, I mean, immigration was a big issue. Democracy was an issue. The economy was the biggest issue. Okay. And it has almost always been in American elections. And we're the political formation with the right answer. The mainstream of the Democratic Party is a zombie ideology. If you actually took, and by the way, it's what keeps Trumpian reactionary, the populist reactionary politics of Trump alive, is the inevitable failure of moderate neoliberal politics, which control the Democratic Party because it's a money-driven system, and the people who operate the Democratic Party crank it up every 2 years and an even bigger way every 4 years, raise a ton of money because the Republicans are so evil, and yeah, they're evil, and they marginalize the progressives. If you look at, there's a lot that's been said about help me out, Sam, with the word realignment, class realignment in the American two-party system. But you actually look at the poll numbers of Democrats, Republicans, and independents on a progressive agenda. First of all, the majority of the population supports the main positions of progressives on domestic economic issues and a lot of other elements of the progressive policy, familiar policy agenda. But on these core economic domestic issues, Democratic Party members overwhelmingly support basically the Sanders economic policy program. And it's the big money that sort of suffocates us as the majority faction of people who vote for the Democratic Party. And so I think right now we have a pointed crisis, a sort of double, triple layer crisis for the moderate Democrats as a political formation. And my message to this group is we have to defeat them. I think we have to try to do so now. There's some heavy lifting involved because, of course, people are very alienated from the Democratic Party. But we have to make a play for power and to take over the Democratic Party. The world needs us to do it. The environmental crisis needs us to do it. At the best case scenario for the performance of a Democratic Party where the moderate centrist faction remains dominant is every 2 years or every 4 years, they may win an election with 50.5% support. And then the next time the Republicans will come in, and the Republicans will get more and more hungry to just suffocate the whole democratic process. And that will just make the Democratic consultancy class raise even more money out of fear of the Republicans. And it's just, it just recycles over and over again. The only way to put an end to it is for our political formation to be ascendant. And within a two-party system, yes, it's of course not what we would want from a political system, but it is what it is. And that means if we win control of the Democratic Party, we actually can do things that we all want to see happen. And, be like the Roosevelt administration and remake American society and remake the largest economy in the world for the 21st century, doing the things we needed to do, totally recalibrate U.S. foreign policy. We can make a very strong play for much greater power in the Democratic Party right now. And that's what PDA is working with in the next few months as we go towards the leadership vote for the DNC. We'll be coordinating with RootsAction, of course. And, I think we should just be bold in making this argument to everybody who has ears to listen with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. And thank you for the call to action and clear prescription for where you think we should go next. And lastly, before we hear from some of you, and we want to hear your questions for the panel and your comments as well, I want to pass it to Norman Solomon, who's the National Director of RootsAction. Thanks, Norman.
Yeah, thanks to everybody for being here. And what I've heard in the last half hour is just so insightful and really transcendent compared to what we're being deluged with from the mass media and the elected officials who get through the mass media. As I thought about this discussion today, this graphic image came to me of concentric circles. And if we imagine what's in the middle of the concentric circles, not that any one of us are frankly all that important in the scheme of things, but it's each one of us. And if we're alert, we know that what has befallen the political system is a huge catastrophe. It's hard to grasp the dimensions of it. We will see it unfold. Certainly the most right-wing fascistic presidency in any of our lifetimes is about to take office on January 20th. And so some basics are really crucial for us. We need to get enough sleep, hopefully getting exercise, be good to ourselves and people around us. That's really, maybe it's a platitude, but it's essential. And then people we're with in our immediate surroundings, we need to, as much as possible, be nurturing them and be in healthy organizational dynamics and relationships and so forth. And then we get out to the organizational structures, some of the broader ones, our organizations, our unions, our activist groups, where without being factionalistic, we need to be critical of the ways in which the capitalism, the xenophobia, the racism, the misogyny that is coming down from the superstructure has damaged our capacities, and as much as possible, move forward in ways that really create not only in our aspirations, but in our daily lives, progressive ethos. And then we get to instruments of electoral power, and we know that that is not all the power that exists, but when we're protesting, when we're writing and speaking and thinking about what we want to have change, ultimately it has to be activated and made real through government. And so the electoral process is the way that sort of turns that wheel ultimately. And electorally, as I think everybody who's spoken in the last half hour has pointed out, one way or another, we need to address not only the fascistic politics of the Republican Party and the forces they represent, but what the Democratic Party is. I saw an article by the climate denier columnist at the New York Times today, Bret Stephens, and he had apparently a very nice get-together with Rahm Emanuel. And they hit it off really great. And this guy's very right-wing, Bret Stephens, a Republican, but he just was touting how terrific Rahm Emanuel is. And he started out by saying it's possible that there can be and I'm forgetting the headline of the piece, but a course correction was the gist, that here, he can flip the script, that Rahm Emanuel might become a chair of the DNC. We don't know if he's really running, but the gist of the piece was, and he would flip the script. He would really move the Democratic Party away from the left. And the close of the piece was, Rahm Emanuel said, I believe in winning. And so we have that challenge to deal with the tendencies that he represents. And we know that on February 1st, the Democratic National Committee is going to elect its new chair. And whether or not Rahm Emanuel is in the running, it looks like we're going to have a waterfall of same old business as usual coming at us. And so I think we have a challenge in the next few weeks to discern who the candidates are, who the best one is, or if you will, the least bad one is, and fight for power. And while we know we can have very little effect on the Republican Party, they're run obviously by a lot of unhinged but very shrewd, vicious people, that it's the Democratic Party that is the electoral vehicle that we need to steer in a much better direction in the electoral arenas that have party designations on their ballot. And here in California and in a lot of other cities, there is no electoral designation for municipal elections, for county elections. So the Democratic Party more or less is irrelevant. But in most places where you get to the bigger districts. If you're looking at state legislatures, of course, federal races, it's the Democrats versus the Republicans. And if we're serious about taking state power, that means we have to transform the Democratic Party away from the engine of income inequality, of xenophobia, of structural racism, of unbridled, or rather somewhat bridled capitalism that continues to ravage people's lives and the planet. So I'll leave it there and thank everybody for being part of our discussion tonight.